Welcome to the MultiCultural MindSet broadcast. Your host is Dr. LaVerne Hanes Collins, a licensed professional counselor, award-winning trainer, and keynote speaker. Dr. Collins is the author of Overlooked: Counselor Insights for the Unspoken Issues in Black American Life. Dr. Collins has also been a featured monthly columnist in the American Counseling Association's Counseling Today magazine with her Honoring Diversity column. Now, here's Dr. Collins.
Hello, and welcome to this episode of the MultiCultural Mindset. Today, we're going to be talking about compound trauma for women of color, for Black and Brown women, and the pervasive and enduring mental, emotional, and physical injuries that come from the intersection of trauma that is often chronic trauma experiences that get multiplied at so many levels. And I'm so glad today that I have got a true scholar with me to help me talk about these things. Dr. Valley is an award-winning, nationally recognized trauma-informed mental health counselor, educator, and scholar. Her work is deeply rooted in equity, healing, and global impact. She's got her PhD in counseling and counselor education from the University of North Carolina at Greensboro, along with a Master of Science in clinical mental health counseling. She is a leading voice in women's health, especially for minoritized women. She also serves as associate editor for the Professional Counselor, which, if you're in this field, you know the important work of that peer-reviewed open access journal. So, Dr. Valley, thank you for being with us today. I am so eager to get the ball rolling and talk to you about these important aspects of trauma for women of color. So, welcome.
Thank you for having me, Dr. Collins.
It is my absolute pleasure. I want to dive right in and just to give our audience an understanding of who you are and what has contributed to your motivation. Let me ask you this. What inspired your deep focus on traumatic experiences for women of color, and how has your journey, personally or professionally, helped to shape your passion?
That's a really valuable question. When I think about my identity as a woman of color, as an Asian Indian immigrant, I realize a lot of these labels were not something I had given myself or recognized for myself. So when I migrated to the States, about 11 years ago now, I was told that I'm a woman of color. I was told that I'm an Asian Indian. While I wasn't really thinking from those lenses when I was living back home in India. Of course, there were other identities that I was navigating. And with this externally imposed identity of my racial, my gender, my immigration status, it came with a more subtle but really strong expectation of the script that I am to follow. We talk about stereotypes such as being the grateful immigrant or the Indian immigrant who is going to hustle and make more than the local community members. But these were not stereotypes that I created or I subscribed to, but they were given to me as a burden to carry. And if I fulfilled them, then I was not good enough because now I'm the greedy immigrant who's making more money. And if I didn't fulfill them, then I wasn't the good enough, hardworking woman of color who needed to be available to make her time and energy available for all. So I slowly started to realize that this was a rigged game that I was being asked to play. There was no winning, definitely no winning for me, but there were definitely parties that were benefiting from the expectations, the prototypes, and the stereotypes that were imposed on me. There was one incident that comes to my mind that really made me realize that I was not welcome, at least in some spaces. And that's when my recognition of being a person of color and the multifaceted identities that I was carrying became something I was aware of. So I was a graduate assistant. I was working in a school in a university job, and it just so happened that my responsibilities involved taking care of making sure the other international students' immigration paperwork and their passports and their visas were up to date. It's a simple job, it's an easy clerical job, but it's one with a lot of impact. As you can imagine, people were trusting me with their passports and visas as international student. And it just so happened that one day a student came to pick up their passport at the office, and the the administrator that I was working with or working under was not able to find the passport. I was not too worried because, we have multiple passports, but it's a very organized table that we have. So I was like, it's a matter of a few seconds. I incidentally had to go to the bathroom at that time and excused myself. And I came back to my lead or my supervisor actually checking my bag for this passport. And I was somewhat confused. I didn't want to make any assumptions. Honestly, my brain did not even think that I could make the assumption that you and I are able to make right now. And so I was asking, can I help you with something? She's like, oh, I was just wondering if the passport got into your backpack somehow. So there was no effort to even hide that. I said, oh, no, I don't think it's going to be in my backpack, and then we found it in another minute or so. It was just in one of the folders where it was supposed to be. We gave the student the passport, and then we never talked about it. And Dr. Collins, we talk about trauma, especially for minoritized intersections based on gender, race, and immigration status. But the challenging part is rarely does our nervous system have the capacity to recognize that trauma is happening right now. I'm being forever changed by how I'm being treated in this space. So I never
Yes.
coded that incident as trauma
Right.
in that moment. It was several years later that the system was ready to say that was not acceptable.
You were being criminalized in someone else's mind
Yeah.
because of your identity. You
Mhm.
had been presumed guilty of something that was, again, clearly just an administrative misplacement. But the assumption, if the first thought was maybe it's in her backpack, that is that is a significant offense. And I understand how, as you're saying, when these things come up in that moment, it's like even with something lesser than that, something like a microaggression, and that was a microaggression, but it was very much a micro probably assault because it was an assault on your character. Um, but even with those, I hate to call them small because I don't want to minimize any microaggression ever. But there are those microaggressions and those assaults and those traumatic events that don't register because we want to be trusting of the other person. We want to trust them. We don't want to believe that they are stereotyping us or that what's really happening is really happening, that there is really an assault going on, an assault against our identity. And tell me if you agree with this, but I believe that women worldwide are probably socialized to be more tolerant, probably socialized to be more trusting. Would you agree with that?
I agree with you 100%. I think there are many folks who benefit from our trusting, soft, and forgiving attitude, mistaking our ancestors and our generosity, our wisdom, our kindness for weakness. So it gets misinterpreted as something to be taken advantage of. But we know that our mothers, grandmothers, our aunties, um, their strength was in their forgiveness and their kindness.
Yes, yes, yes. It's a double-edged sword, isn't it? That was their strength, and that very strength used against them and us to this
Mhm.
day still. Thank you for that. And I have much respect for the language that you use. You said you recognized that this was like it was rigged and you weren't going to win because the expectation, um, if I want to use the word, if not, if it was unmet, if you
Mhm.
didn't meet the expectation, it was judged either way. It was adversely judged, um, in such a way that there was no win. So just being who you were, being who you are, was clearly, unfortunately, going to be used against you no matter what. And I thank you for sharing. Thank you for sharing that language. And I thank you for sharing that story. And I'm sure that there are women for whom that kind of experience is resonating. And particularly when you talk about people, us not recognizing it when it's happening.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when you think about that, now I'm thinking about the layers of traumatic experiences that women of color have. What I'm thinking what comes to mind is a race or ethnicity and gender, but say more. Let's go into some depth. What are some other layers of identity that can very easily allow us to be holders of trauma in our bodies?
Yeah, that's so valuable. This really touches upon another niche passion and interest of mine, which is maternal mental health. When you talk about holding trauma in our body, um, a lot of us birthers also hold the baby in our body, so it's not separate. Our journey of pregnancy, birth, labor, and then nursing and caring for our babies in the way that we choose, in the way that we recognize to be safe and appropriate for our families, has always been questioned. Always. I'll give you
Mm,
one ridiculous example. I honestly wish I had a different adjective for it. But here we talk about the importance of time off, the time off after work
mhm,
once you have a baby. And when you do a simple Google search, something like what is the recommended average time off after a C-section? And Google will typically tell you around 6 weeks. Okay. And then if you do another Google search and say, what is a typical recovery time after a major abdominal surgery? It will tell you 10 to 12 weeks.
mm.
And then third search is C-section a major abdominal surgery? And Google will say, yes, it is. It's only because the surgery happens for women and non-binary folks
Wow.
that it's easier to write it off as something we need to be back on our feet.
Wow.
Same 7 layers of body tissue when it's cut up for a
Wow.
man and comes under the general umbrella of a major abdominal surgery. Here is your unquestioned 12 weeks.
Wow. Wow. That is ridiculous to use your adjective. That is ridiculous. That is ridiculous. And I thank you for bringing that up because I'd never noticed that. I'd never noticed that. I never had major surgeries aside from my cesarean births. So I guess I thought that the recovery time for all surgery was 6 to 8 weeks. But
No. Only if you have a vagina, but or a uterus, right? So, and I think when we read in pieces of information, you and I are able to find the lighter side of that right now. But I strongly suspect there's a layer of pain and betrayal underneath that too. I mean,
mhm,
think about um, women, but especially Black and Brown women who are expected to generously give away their time and labor, who are dealing with already existing economic disparities, are told 6 to 8 weeks. If you don't feel like you're back and if you don't feel like a champ, So there's something wrong with you,
There's
not the
something wrong
system
with you.
that affects
Yeah,
this.
yeah, yeah. Our system, especially in the United States, but I believe this is an international problem. But our system, I can only speak of the system in the United States of America is, as you said, very unfriendly in general. The entire, um, both the medical industrial complex and the mental health industrial complex, not friendly, not friendly to women of color, not friendly to women, and even less friendly to women of color,
Absolutely.
for
And,
sure.
and the secondary trauma of knowing that maybe your sister went into labor and no doctor was listening to her, or you hear stories of your mother knocking on doctor's doors saying, I'm in pain, please help me out. We carry those stories. Our nervous system carries those stories. So when the whole world expects me to be excited for a
Hmm.
pregnancy, not
Hmm.
feeling that way, the fact is, I'm not feeling that way because I'm super scared what's going to happen to me.
Yes, yes, yes. I am working with women right now facing those same kinds of fears for those exact same reasons. It's just it's just all too common. It's all too common. What are some other layers of trauma for uh, women of color that get
Absolutely.
overlooked?
Yeah, one especially that's salient in our current sociopolitical climate, Dr. Collins, is one of immigration or assumed immigration status too, because of our skin tone, our accent, our hair texture. We are not assumed to be a natural part of the society's fabric. But seemingly distant sociopolitical threats or decision has dramatic and direct impact. A friend of mine, she was pregnant earlier this year, around, I believe, January. That's when her due date was hovering. And if we recall, it was around the Jan and Feb months of the new administration when the whole idea of naturalized citizenship was being brought into question and was being asked to be revoked, essentially saying children who are born in the US are no longer automatically assumed to be US citizens. It's going to have to be based on several other criteria. We don't have all the criteria, we don't have a timeline, but we're going to think about it. And my friend, she is also a fellow Indian immigrant like myself. Her husband is also an Indian immigrant, like me and my husband. Um, believe it or not, as soon as she hit the 38 weeks, she begged her doctors for an induction. She was begging them, saying, I don't know what's going to change in the next few weeks, in the next few months. I cannot afford to stay pregnant and risk the amount of paperwork that I'm going to be asked to complete, or what is going to even be my son's citizenship. How am I going to apply for a passport if I want to take home and have him visit his grandparents? I would rather risk an induction, which of course has an increased risk for C-section too, and other complications, um, than risk what's going to happen for his identity. So she did end up having an early induction for no medical reasons, for no health reasons, but for political reasons. So the
Mm,
idea of planning your
mm,
birth around the country's politics can feel
wow.
extremely foreign, but it really isn't. It really
Mm,
isn't.
mm, mm. I've heard of other situations where doctors and birthing, or even, I wouldn't say birthing women, doctors and uh, their patients of childbearing age are having conversations that are based on, unfortunately, having to plan your family life around the directions of the uh, uh, birthing politics in their state
Yeah.
and nationally, but especially in the state where they live. That's been one of the biggest concerns. I'm licensed in 4 states, so I talk to people in throughout the southeast here, and that is huge. My jaw dropped the first time someone told me that they and their doctor had a conversation about the politics of her getting pregnant again, of her conceiving again at her age, at risk levels and things like that, because of what the laws were about to do.
Mm-mm, mm-mm.
Yeah.
And if we think about it, in most countries, the idea of bearing children, raising them, is a nation building exercise that governments are thankful for, that families are choosing to do this. Because if we go on a strike, we won't have any future workers, if you think about it.
Yeah.
But here, it's kind of flipped around where our birthing experience, our pregnancy experience is seen as a liability, as an inconvenience, has to be externally managed, where the person who's pregnant is a mere container,
Mm, a mere
right?
container.
Mm.
Oh, that that language breaks my heart because it's accurate. That's accurate. That breaks my heart. But please
We are not,
continue. Yes.
yeah, no, we're not seen as, it's frankly insulting as mothers to be told that we are not invested in our baby's best interest. We know intuitively this person is living inside our body. We know what's going on for the most part. We have a sense of idea of,
Hmm.
is the baby okay? How's the birth going? Am I really ready to push? Am I really ready to have this baby right now? Is this a good season for me? Do I need to actually be on birth control right now? All of these choices are taken away from us. And this is not happening in isolation. If we think about the foundation of modern day obstetrics, it literally lies on the bodies of Native and Black women. We know what we know about OBGYN based on, of
Because, yep.
course, dehumanization of Native and Black women in the US.
Yes. 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 Countless um, studies, research, experiments on Black women, Indigenous women, against their, without their knowledge or against their will for way too long. It shouldn't have happened at all, but this was still going on just in my lifetime.
It really is still going on. We talk about how women are being dramatic in birth, or women are overreacting to their fears. But we know not too long ago, the whole C-section by the so-called father of modern day obstetrics was perfected on essentially four enslaved Black women who went through as many as 30 surgeries a year without any form of pain management. So to use that knowledge now against us one more time and be told, this is not about you, this is about the baby. This is not about you, this is about the family. This is not about you, you're overreacting to the pain.
Mm.
It's not an individual gaslighting, it's a collective gaslighting.
It's dehumanizing too. It's
Mhm.
dehumanizing. These are human, we are human beings. We
Mhm.
are not lab rats. It's human beings.
Mhm.
Beings. So, yes. So, we're talking about things that don't come up in conversation. What else is missing in conversations about maternal mental health and other kinds of trauma that women carry in their experience in their bodies? What's missing whenever we don't center marginalized voices as you and I are doing today?
We also know that, I mean, speaking at an aggregate level, but the statistics are far worse for Black and Native women. We also know that in general, Black and Brown women are exposed to a lot more sexual violence. We also know that their bodies are objectified at a much earlier age when they're mere children, and used as a justification for the sexual assault that is perpetrated against them,
Mm,
right? Know that when Native women go and complain that their girls are missing, the typical practice is to file the first investigation report within 24 hours. But almost always for Native women, it isn't done until 48 hours. And that doesn't happen because of stereotypes that Native women are more promiscuous, Native women are more wayward, don't have a character. When in reality, Native women are brought up to own their sexuality, own their autonomy, own their agency. That doesn't sit well with our Puritan understanding of what a woman should be.
Mm.
So we immediately recast it as someone who is, of course, going to go missing or is probably using really disrespectful language to the family by saying, oh, she's probably just a boyfriend, she's probably hooking up, really, really disrespectful. And what happens, it's so critical that we get the evidence, gather the evidence, interview the people in the first 24 hours. But what happens the longer we wait, memories get more vague and diffuse, evidence can be tampered with, and the chances of us finding these beautiful missing and murdered Indigenous women and Two-Spirit folks goes lower and lower and lower. So it is a very difficult interlocking system ranging from politics, healthcare, criminal justice, and then even the neighborhoods or the work, your place of employment, as I mentioned. So when women turn around, especially women of color, asking for support in the nation building work that they want to do, or even in being part of the nation, whether we choose to give birth or not, we are turned away. We are seen as an inconvenience. We are seen as a fear. We are seen as a bother that we need to be silenced and managed.
Wow. And women survive. Women survive. How can women who survive, who are survivors of these various types of trauma, how can they reclaim their narrative? How can they reclaim their voice, their stories when their voices are perpetually minimized, marginalized, silenced, and not believed? What are the processes? What are the things, the themes of a woman doing this kind of work to heal?
Yeah, I really appreciate that question because a lot of time women of color are recasted as carrying legacy burdens, as being traumatized, broken, damaged individuals. But I go back when I teach my students or work with my clients, I say our ancestors are far wiser. Their wisdom outpaces the cruelty of our oppressors. They anticipated a lot of this mess and they protected us even before this mess came into our lives. So going back to the origin stories of our communities, going back to the caretaking practices of our communities. You know, Dr. Collins, we talk about self-care, and self-care is such a buzzword right now, and it's been commodified like everything else. You know, you want self-care, go for a $100 pedicure. You want self-care, go for a $200 massage. You want self-care, go to the Bahamas for an 8-day vacation. But yes.
Spend money and give money back to institutions.
Give your money to us, right? And those are, I'm not saying those are completely wrong choices, but there's a context to all of those choices. But self-care in our communities was not about that transaction. You give me money, I give you self-care. It was about making our girls and boys sit on a Sunday evening and say, come, let me braid your hair. It was about making those unique treats, savory, sweet, and saying, I'm going to feed you. I know you're hurting and I cannot fix what's hurting you right now. Here's a tray of lasagna. Let's eat this and let's sit and let's watch the sunset.
Yeah.
Right? One of the most beautiful forms of self-care that I have benefited from and continue to benefit from is hair. Our hairs are, our hair is such a cultural and spiritual product for Black and brown women.
Mhm.
And folks from outside of this framework may not understand. But my grandmother, I'm privileged that my hair has been braided by both my grandmothers, my mother, and several of my aunties. And that's a gift I carry. This carries more stories than what maybe my journal would. And my mother saying, "Come, let me braid your hair." Or when I'm
Yes.
freshly postpartum and I'm leaking from everywhere, my mother saying, "Let me rub this oil on your body and go sit in that hot shower. I'll take care of things." We cannot put a price tag to this.
Can't put a price. You can't buy that.
You cannot buy that. And you definitely cannot sell that. So that
You-
is not seen as self-care. That's not seen as community care, or the idea of making tea or coffee or whatever is the beverage of choice and saying, "Today is hard. Let's talk about it. Let's work through
you,
it."
you know, Dr. Valley, what I hear you saying in some ways is that the the self-care that Black and brown or people, women of color really benefit from can be readily or is readily available in our historical narrative. But the problem is that those aspects of our story are collectivistic. They involve other people within the culture. And that is contrary to the individualism that's so prevalent in the United States of America. So if we are willing to bring back some of that collectivism, that collectivistic mindset and commitment, we can actually tap into the healing power that that we carry historically. And we often speak about carrying intergenerational trauma, but what you're tapping into is ways of intergenerational healing.
Mhm. Absolutely. Our healing is not things that we can put it on a Pinterest, so to speak. Our healing often look like co-sleeping, Dr. Collins. As
Mm,
big families saying, "Come to mama's bed. Let's all sleep together. I don't care if you're 18."
mm,
Um,
ah,
and now we get all these fancy journals saying co-sleeping is great. If you have a partner that you co-sleep with, you tend to live 5 years, 10 years, 12 years longer. Of course we do. Why do you think our ancestors did that together? Because we know the heart rate, then, it starts to mirror, it starts to stabilize. The warmth helps us. And even from an evolutionary standpoint, we can relax more because we know there are more people to look out for dangers.
yes,
Stargazing,
yes.
our ancestors have been looking at stars forever. Come nighttime, we all go up the terrace or sit in the fields and just look at the stars. But now we have
Stars.
it as EMDR, right? Move your eyes this way and that. But what do you think we were doing looking at the stars,
Mm,
right?
yes,
So really
yes.
going back to the stories, the wisdom, the ideas that are not glorified, commodified, and is available on aisle 17 of Target, those are the ideas that heal us in a long-term, sustainable way. And we talk about self-care, but it's kind of silly to think about how we're hurting and we're expected to take care of ourselves because we need community care. That's how we kind of pass on that energy.
Yeah,
So that's
yeah,
what we need to do more of.
yeah. Thank you. It's so important to recognize those individualistic values that do not center our stories and our histories as women of color, Black and brown women. It's important to either the word now is decolonize. So we separate ourselves. We take inventory of what we're carrying that was placed upon us rather than what comes from within us. And to be mindful that in this economic structure, many of the things that we speak of as healing are much more, were not really intended for healing. They're intended for capitalistic, gain and economics and whatnot, feeding institutions. And I'm all for independent businesses and such, but there's a point at which, because we have as people been oppressed, marginalized, reduced, invalidated, that we we can easily begin to devalue and um, internally internally invalidate what's there, silence it. And what you're saying is, let's begin our healing by exploring and giving expression to what is already in our lineage, already within our reach, and we don't have to spend money all the time for healing. And um, sometimes self-care means removing yourself from things that you need constant breaks, regular breaks from.
Yeah. Yeah.
And yes, I appreciate everything you've said. Such a rich conversation. And is I should not say is it safe, but would you agree that helpers can encourage women to do these kinds of things? And yes or no? And what else can helpers do? Counselors, therapists, etc.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not trying to sound extra, but I think we have a moral responsibility to talk about this as clinicians. And I say this because the foundation of counseling is wellness. The foundation of counseling is health. Foundation of counseling is being able to pursue our full potential. So when we are asking our clients around healing, but it's not aligned with their stories, it's not aligned with their values, it's not aligned with who they are and where they come from, we have now posed one more burden on them to translate, to code switch these treatment options, these recommendations into what will make sense for them, right? It, I understand, for instance, the concept of boundaries, but boundaries look very different for Black and Brown communities. You
Yes.
you cannot tell me to cut my mother off because she's
Yes.
not respecting my no, I'm
Yes.
going to cut you off. So really translating treatment options, really translating coping strategies,
Yes.
the needs of the client, as opposed to expecting the client to translate that into their own culture. It's a moral responsibility. It's an ethical responsibility of counselors. So we must do that.
Thank you for saying that. Thank you for adding that, because more often than not, counselors do not take on the responsibility of helping with that translation or encouraging that translation. Um, but that is what it means to be a culturally sensitive, culturally relevant helping professional. And I thank you for all that you are doing, for your research, for your teaching, for your writings, for all the things that you are doing to move us closer to a culture where equity is valued and where diverse considerations are no longer marginalized. Thank you for all that you do.
Oh, Dr. Collins, thanks for all that you do and create space that so that others around you can also do that work. You're really spearheading that work.
Well, thank you. Thank you. And thank you for being with us today. This has been such a rich conversation. I believe that everybody listening or watching is going away, having taken copious notes, they're going away with light bulbs going off, just insights, insights, insights. So thank you for seeding those insights in the people who are in our audience. And to our audience, we thank you for being a part of this conversation. I hope that you have walked away with so many golden nuggets, whether you are working in this field or whether you are a woman who is gleaning for your own personal growth and your own personal healing. I hope that you have gotten as much from this as I have as I received today from Dr. Valley and from this rich conversation. I just want to encourage everyone, if you are a therapist, a counselor, a psychologist, if you are a pastor, a teacher, if you work in the medical profession, I hope that you will make a commitment, if you haven't already, to a multicultural mindset whereby we can pay attention with cultural relevance to how we serve diverse populations. We want to keep practicing with empathy, humility, and a multicultural mindset. And I'll see you next time.